I still remember the morning a proud grandfather told me his legs felt as if someone had quietly turned down the power. Last month he carried groceries up his front steps without thinking, but today his calves wobbled halfway to the porch, and one foot felt strangely cool inside a warm shoe. It is easy to blame age. I did the same until years at the bedside taught me a harder truth. When strength fades without a clear reason, the lifeline to your feet may be getting pinched, and time may already be slipping. Here is the part most people miss, and the part I want you to hear first. Weak legs can be a quiet alarm that your circulation and your nerves are under strain, and that alarm matters because your feet live at the far end of the blood supply. The risk is real, but so is the path forward. Before we go deeper, I want you to have a simple place to begin tonight. Take a slow walk at a comfortable pace so your calves start working again as the natural pumps they were meant to be. Set your legs up on a pillow for a short while to ease pooling. Look closely at your heels and toes under a warm light, and ask your clinician about a quick ankle brachial index test if calf tightness shows up with walking. Clinicians give this pattern a plain name that I use every day. It is peripheral artery disease, and it narrows the inner lining of leg arteries the way silt narrows a quiet creek. So muscles that once glided begin to cramp because they are running low on oxygen. Another partner in this story is nerve damage that can follow long-standing diabetes, a shortage of vitamin B12, or heavy alcohol use. And when nerves go quiet, you can miss a blister long enough for infection to take hold. National guidelines in the United States encourage early evaluation when leg pain arrives with walking and when one foot runs colder or changes color, because attention at this stage can prevent ulcers and protect mobility. Beginning with small steps has clear strengths. It is safe for most people, it costs very little, and it gives you quick feedback that builds confidence. It also has a limit I want to say out loud. Home steps do not reopen a severely blocked artery, and they do not replace medical care, which is why I pair them with a conversation about testing and a plan you and your clinician can adjust. If any part of this picture sounds like your morning, do not panic and do not ignore it. Your body rarely shouts first. It whispers. When you answer early, you turn a whisper into a plan. Stay with me, and I will show you what tends to hide under that creeping weakness, how to spot the earliest changes before they snowball, and which small moves protect the feet that carry your independence. One of the hardest lessons I learned beside my patients is that weakness in the legs is not always about getting older. I want you to picture your arteries as long highways that carry oxygen-rich blood down to your calves, ankles, and toes. Now imagine that traffic jam after traffic jam keeps piling up until cars are moving in a slow trickle. That is what fatty plaque does to the vessels of your legs. The Centers for Disease Control has estimated that millions of older adults in the United States live with this silent roadblock called peripheral artery disease, often without knowing it. The first sign may be a calf that cramps after a short walk or a foot that stays cold under a blanket. Yet those whispers are often brushed aside. The strength of this picture is that once you see circulation as a highway, you realize a tiny blister can turn into an open wound that never heals because the repair crew never arrives. The weakness is that these signs are so easy to excuse as normal aging that by the time pain becomes constant, infection and tissue death are already waiting. I tell my patients that prevention can start with something as simple as noticing the pattern. If your legs grow heavy after walking a block, and the relief comes only when you stop to rest, that is called claudication, and it is worth a conversation with your doctor. The advantage of paying attention early is clear. You avoid the spiral that ends in ulcers or even amputation. You keep your mobility and you protect your independence. The limitation is also clear. At home, you cannot remove plaque that has been building for decades. That takes medical care. But awareness is the bridge between a quiet symptom and a real solution. So tonight, as you think about your own legs, do not just remember the miles they have carried you. Notice if they are starting to whisper, because each whisper is a chance to act before the highway shuts down. What startled me most over the years is that sometimes the real danger does not begin in the arteries at all, but in the very nerves and muscles that were meant to protect you. Think of the nerves in your feet as the electric wiring in a home. When they are healthy, they send instant warnings if something sharp or hot touches the skin. But when diabetes, a shortage of vitamin B12, or heavy alcohol use damages those tiny wires, the warnings never arrive. You could step on a tack, keep walking, and by the time you notice the skin has already broken open. At the same time, your calf muscles are supposed to act like natural pumps. Each time you take a step, those muscles squeeze blood upward toward the heart. The American Heart Association has shown that when these muscles weaken from long periods of sitting, from illness, or from injury, the pumping action slows and blood begins to pool in the lower legs. The skin stretches, swelling rises, and ulcers can form in places as small as a heel or a toe. The strength of recognizing this early is that you can add back small habits that make the pump work again. A 10-minute walk after dinner, a few sets of heel raises while brushing your teeth, even ankle circles while seated keep blood moving and nerves alert. The weakness of this system is that you cannot always feel the damage. Neuropathy can hide for months or years, so by the time you notice numbness, the problem has already grown. That is why I urge my patients to look at their feet with their eyes even if they do not feel anything unusual with their nerves. Tonight, before you go to bed, sit under a good light, lift each foot, and check the heels and the toes. If you see swelling, redness, or a blister that lingers, those are signals worth hearing. Awareness may not rebuild a damaged nerve on its own, but it turns a silent threat into an early rescue. I will never forget Robert, a 72-year-old retired mechanic who came to me after weeks of ignoring the weight in his legs. He told me he first felt sluggish on his morning walks but decided he was simply tired from gardening. Then, one afternoon, he felt a sharp sting on his big toe, and when the pain faded by evening, he thought the problem had solved itself. What he did not realize was that his nerves had already gone numb. His wife noticed the deep cut days later, and by the time I examined him, the infection had spread. Tests confirmed severe artery disease and nerve damage. The American Diabetes Association has long warned that foot infections in people with poor circulation are among the leading causes of amputation in older adults. Yet Robert had never heard of that risk until he lived it. The strength of his story is that it makes the danger real. It shows how quickly a quiet weakness can snowball into weeks in a hospital bed and a battle to save a limb. The weakness of his story is that he waited for the pain to go away instead of asking why it appeared in the first place. I tell this not to frighten you, but to remind you of the solution he wished he had chosen. If you notice new weakness, cold feet, or a sore that does not heal, bring it to your doctor immediately. A single visit could mean the difference between treating a blister and fighting to keep your foot. Robert himself told me later that had he acted at the first sign, he might have spared himself the ordeal. His regret can be your lesson, and his warning can be your shield. What I have seen again and again is that weakness in the legs rarely comes from a single cause. More often, it is the slow partnership of many small forces. Diabetes stiffens blood vessels. Heart and kidney disease strain circulation. Years of smoking tighten the arteries until they barely open, and poor shoes rub against fragile skin. At the same time, missing nutrients like vitamin D, vitamin B12, or zinc weaken the very fibers that keep nerves and muscles alive. The National Institutes of Health has shown how deficits in these vitamins slow nerve repair and lower muscle strength. And research confirms that smoking can nearly double the risk of peripheral artery disease. I think of Carol, a 68-year-old retired teacher who came to me because of a red patch on her heel. She believed it was just a mark from new sandals and assumed it would fade. Instead, it deepened into a sore because her circulation was poor and her vitamin B12 was dangerously low. Within 2 weeks, she was in my clinic facing the possibility of a chronic ulcer. The strength of looking at her case is that it reminds us every small choice adds up. Shoes, meals, and habits build the ground we walk on. The weakness is that when many small forces add together, they are easy to dismiss. Each excuse seems reasonable until the damage is already visible. That is why I encourage people to make one change at a time. Replace one cigarette break with a short walk, add a serving of leafy greens, or check that your shoes fit with room for the toes. None of these steps alone can reverse years of strain, but each one shifts the balance toward healing. Carol herself told me she wished she had asked about that patch sooner. Her story is a mirror we can all use. The most powerful shift I have watched in my patients begins with a single choice. A man who once feared every step now walks 10 minutes each evening, and a woman who lived with swelling in her ankles found new strength after adding salmon and spinach to her weekly meals. These changes may look small, but they rebuild the foundation. The American Heart Association has shown that regular walking improves circulation in the legs, lowers blood pressure, and strengthens the very calf muscles that act as natural pumps. The National Institutes of Health highlights that diets rich in leafy greens, omega-3 fish, and vitamin B12 help nerves repair and muscles recover. The strength of this approach is its simplicity. Movement, food, and checkups weave together into a safety net. You do not need a gym membership or exotic supplements. You need steady steps, balanced meals, and a doctor who checks your feet and your circulation at least once a year. The weakness of this approach is that results do not arrive overnight. A blocked artery will not melt away with one salad or a week of walks. That is why I tell my patients to see these actions not as cures, but as reinforcements that make medical treatments more effective. Tonight you can begin by standing up after dinner, walking the length of your hallway, and looking at your heels under a lamp. It is a quiet act, but quiet acts done every day have the power to change a future. More than once, I have watched a small scratch turn into the reason someone ends up in an operating room. Patients tell me they thought it was only a minor mark or a shoe blister, and by the time they came to me, the infection had crept deep into the tissue. The American Diabetes Association reports that foot ulcers are the leading cause of non-traumatic amputations in the United States, and most of them began as tiny wounds that could have been treated early. The strength of knowing this is that it arms you with awareness. When you realize that every sore is a chance to intervene, you see how much power you still hold. The weakness is that these wounds do not hurt when nerves are damaged, so people often miss the window for easy treatment. That is why I tell my patients never to wait for pain as a signal. Pain may not come. Instead, look at your feet under a lamp each night. If you see a blister, a red spot, or a cut that is not closing, call your doctor right away. The solution is often simple when it begins, and the reward is the freedom to keep walking on your own 2 feet. I want you to remember that prevention is not about fear. It is about protecting independence and the life you love. I have often told my patients that the body whispers long before it screams. A heavy leg, a cold toe, or a blister that lingers are not random annoyances. They are messages from the same highways and pumps we spoke about earlier. When blood flow slows and nerves fall silent, those whispers are the only warning you will receive. The Mayo Clinic has shown that when peripheral artery disease is detected early, the risk of severe complications drops dramatically. The strength of this truth is that it puts the power back in your hands. You can choose to listen, to act, and to protect the steps that carry you through each day. The weakness is that ignoring these whispers closes doors. Once the disease advances, the road narrows, and options shrink until surgery or amputation are the only paths left. I tell you this not to fill you with fear, but to hand you hope. Tonight, you can look at your feet. Tomorrow, you can take a short walk. And next week, you can ask your doctor to check your circulation. Each small act is a promise to your future. Remember that prevention is not a single event, but a daily habit. Your legs are not just limbs. They are your freedom, your independence, and the bridge to the life you love. Protect them with the same care you give to your most valued treasures, and they will carry you far beyond today.